Oh. Hi, Jacko.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
hi. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late. I was on a business call that I should have got off a few minutes earlier. So sorry about that.
It's all right.
So anyway, yeah. So how's it going?
I didn't get like too much done, but I did find or I did like research about like Staten Island and stuff. And I
So you
found
did
some
more. Okay.
and I found like information about like how Staten Island is divided.
How what's divided?
How Staten Island's divided.
I'm sorry. Could you say it one more time?
I found info about how Staten Island is divided.
Oh, you mean like politically, right?
Yeah, politically.
Right. So tell me about that quick.
So I looked at our map and I found some statistics, and it's kind of like divided down the middle of Staten Island, where the top is, I'm pretty sure, is a little more liberal, and then the bottom is more
Conservative.
conservative. Yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
it's kind of like a 50-50 in a way, but I think it leans a little more liberal.
Well, Staten Island, I mean, from the political point of view, Staten Island typically is the only um, uh, borough in New York City that pretty consistently votes Republican. So you know, the Bronx, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, they're always vote Democrat. Staten Island, in fact, they elected for Congress like 4 years ago, like the first Democrat to go send to Congress for the, you know, in a long, long time. And then he was only there for 2 years, and then then they voted for a Republican. And now that same Democrat is running against that Republican that beat him um, in 2018. No, I'm sorry, 2020. 2020. So anyway, so Staten Island is very, like you say, it's very divided because now, you know, you can get enough votes to vote Democrat. You can get enough votes to vote Republican. So it reflects a lot of like parts in the country that are pretty evenly divided like that. So that's useful information to know because now, you know, in fact, what you might want to do is analyze, you know, find out what the positions on climate change are between the congressional. I know the Democrat's name is Max Rose, like the flower rose.
Oh, I actually see a lot of people with like posters on their like lawn and like signs.
Right. And I don't know what the Republican's name is. I can't, it's like an Italian name or a Greek name. It's a Greek name that starts with an M, I think. But what would be useful with that knowledge now, and the election's coming up, like in 3 weeks. So maybe one useful exercise for you now is between now and the election on November 8th, you make sure you analyze the platforms of the two candidates. So you know what a platform is. That's where you go to their websites. Most candidates will have a platform on how, you know, where they stand on lots of different issues, right? So there'll be all these issues, and there will certainly be one for climate change or sustainability, there'll be some keyword like that where they'll say what their policy is. Like, if you elect me, this is what I'm going to push for when I go to Washington, D.C. That would be a very interesting analysis to do, and then write something up about it. I'm thinking, instead of having you keep writing this bigger thing, but maybe the best exercise is for you to translate research into writing is to do smaller things. So maybe this is a good example of a smaller thing that you can then later integrate in the bigger project, right? But since one of the important, my teaching point always is relevancy, and something that's that's what people want to read about. They want to read about, they don't want to read about something that might be important or interesting a couple years from now. They want to read about what's interesting and important right now, right? And right now, it's all about the elections on November 8th. And that gives you a nice sort of couple weeks to figure out, basically, I think your analysis would be is, see, I think this is what your analysis, Jocko, is, because you also have to remember, in politics, there's two kinds of politicians that people elect. They elect politicians that they send to Washington, D.C., who are representing their districts, representing Staten Island. I think Staten Island is just one congressional district, I think. It might include parts of Brooklyn too. That would be a good map to find. What is the congressional district that includes Staten Island? And they all have numbers. So and they change sometimes because they redistrict every 10 years after the census. But I used to be in Congressional District 19 of New York, and now I'm in Congressional District 18. But where Staten Island is, I mean, that's something we can look up right now real quick. Let's see. Staten Island Congressional District. So my point here was, Jocko, is that you have these politicians that you send to Washington. But in many ways, the politicians that don't go to Washington, the ones that are in Staten Island, and that was the political structure I think would be interesting for you to research, is how is Staten Island divided up? Does Staten Island, is it a county? How, is there an assembly of, or an executive committee with people that are elected? The local Staten Island Congressional District.
I found it. It's the 11th Congressional District.
Right. And have you found a map for it?
Yeah, it includes the entirety of Staten Island and a part of Brooklyn.
And a part of Brooklyn. Yeah, that's what I remember. Right. And generally it's considered conservative, right? That they always voted Republican. But now with this Max Rose, he did win, but he's a veteran, he was a soldier in Iraq or Afghanistan or both of them. Again, I can't see, but okay, so now you know what that is, right? So, what would be interesting, I think, for you to work on is to sort of do, because if you're interested in sustainability, if you're interested in people changing, because this was your original interest, if I remember, way back in the summer, your original main interest seemed to be, how do people have to change their consumption behavior, right? To live a more sustainable life. And which will also slow climate change, the negatives of climate change, which will particularly impact Staten Island because of rising sea levels. If I remember right, that was sort of the construct there. And if you're still interested, if that's still a key interest of yours, because remember, you should be doing, this is a luxury. You're not in high school where you're being assigned to do something, right? So what's nice about this out of school project is that you can really do exactly what you want to do, right? So you should always be thinking about that. But if you were really concerned about consumer behavior and how consumers might possibly, or, how they should be changing their lifestyles to live a more sustainable life, to cut down on waste and cut down on, there's all these issues that consumer, well, then it's all about, it really tends to, there's only two influencers, basically, groups of influencers that can get people to change their lifestyle, to get people to stop, buying cases of bottled water. That's just one really good example, a very concrete example. I mean, you could write, a whole chapter on how, the problem with plastic water bottles. And even though New York City has this deposit program where, you're charged 5 cents for every one of those bottles, and you won't get that money back unless you take them back to be recycled. The percentage of people who actually do that is really low. That would be a good research question. How many people are actually, what is the percentage of plastic bottles that are being recycled in New York City? And you might even be able to find it for Staten Island. And to get people to stop doing that, or at least if they're going to buy plastic bottles, to make sure, instead of like 15% get back to the recycling centers, get it up to 95% get back to the recycling centers. Either the government, the local government, not the guy who goes to Washington, but the politicians right on the island have to make that a priority and get that message across. And then private citizens can do that too through advocacy groups, right? Where people, that's why I was wondering, you should be researching and to see who, I'm sure there must be a handful of people, who really care about this stuff, that have organized groups in which they, again, are trying to educate and provide information and make the situation more visible, so that the people of Staten Island, are being more mindful of how they live, and more mindful when they go to the store and buy things. So that's what I was sort of pointing you to, because you have to find out, what is the government of the local government of Staten Island? What are they doing, if anything, to specifically, concerning sustainability issues, and particularly in informing the residents of Staten Island on how, they can change their lifestyle. And I'm telling you, Jacko, when it comes to climate change, yeah, you can build big barriers in front of the island so parts won't get so flooded and all that. You can do all that, but nothing's going to really change until almost everybody changes the way they live, right? Everybody, starts buying things with less packaging. Everybody stops using less plastic. Everybody starts eating less meat, because meat has a particularly bad impact on climate change because of the cattle and clearing trees so the cattle can graze, and then the methane that comes out of cattle. And so, you know, they have to do a lot of things that most people don't want to do, right?
Mhm.
I mean,
Is
what if
this-
you went, your parents eat red meat? Do your parents eat red meat?
Yeah.
Okay, so what if you went to your parents and you'd say, listen, I'm really worried about the future, and I'm actually very worried about the immediate the impact on where we live here in Staten Island. And I'm wondering if I could get you to think about to either stop eating beef or to, you know, make it a rare treat. You know, you eat it, you know, some people sort of have, I know some families have um have a tradition where they only eat it once a week. Some might only eat it once a month. Some might only eat red meat on their birthday. And just what kind of reaction do you think you'd get from your parents if you pose that question to them?
That's actually really interesting. I'm not too sure, but I know we don't eat like that much red meat often. It's
Right.
usually more on like occasions, or like we don't usually buy like a lot of steak.
Right.
It's more so like chicken, if anything.
But you probably eat hamburgers fairly often, right?
Not really.
Not really?
Yeah. It, I don't like eating from those places. I find it really unhealthy, I guess.
Well, yeah, you're right. Um, so okay, so maybe that's not the right question to your parents. Maybe what else could you ask them? Because you just want to get a feel
Mhm.
of how difficult, or maybe not so difficult, it could be to get people to think about something, and not just think about it, but to actually do something and change their lifestyle, their behavior, because that's the key to all this. So I don't know what else you could ask your parents, like, do you guys buy bottled water?
Yeah. We
Okay.
usually drink out of bottled water.
Right. Okay, there's a good one. If you really want to make a real difference in climate change, you got to get your family to stop buying bottles of water. So there's a challenge for you, right?
The funny thing is, I actually have 3 on my desk right now.
Well, there you go. You have to stop drinking bottled water, right?
Mhm.
So if you're doing that because you're afraid of the water quality in Staten Island that comes out of your faucets, is that the idea, that your parents don't trust the water coming out of the faucets? Do you think?
Yeah, I think that also like influences it.
Or the taste, right?
Yeah, I think it's mainly the taste and like just faucet water in general.
Right.
We used to boil our water from the faucet, but we
Really?
stopped. Yeah, we stopped doing that.
All right. So what you can do, then your challenge as a test case is try to get your parents, talk to your parents, tell, you know, get them to start thinking about, we really got to stop. You know, you just tell them, you know, I've been doing this research and I'm really learning how bad plastic waste is, and particularly plastic bottles. You guys recycle all your bottles? Do you bring them back to get your nickel for everyone?
No.
Yeah, so you throw them out. Oh my God. So you got it. That has to stop like tomorrow.
Wait. Aren't there like recycling trucks that come around?
Well, I
Or
don't
like
know. Are there? I mean, do you put them in the plastic recycling? Is that what you do?
I think so, because we don't throw the garbage out in the same like bags as the
Right. So you
plastic.
have recycling and you have waste, right?
Yeah.
Right. But listen, I mean, if you bought a case of 24 plastic bottles, they come in a case of 24 generally. and you're paying 5 cents for each case, that's $1.20, right? So number one, by not, keeping them, like, have a big barrel in the garage where you're keeping them, and then you have to take them somewhere to get the 5 cents back. And there's usually places, I don't know about Staten Island. See, this is all really good practical research. Are there bottle recycling places on
Oh,
Staten Island?
are you talking about like the machines where you put the bottle in and you get
Well,
like
the
5 cents
machines
back?
is one. Yeah, the machines. The problem with the machines is they're sometimes full or they're not working, and it can be really frustrating. You show up at your 500 plastic bottles, or there's someone else with 500 plastic bottles and you have to wait 20 minutes. What's better are these places where you put them all. That's what I do up here. I take all my plastic bottles and glass bottles, and the things that I pay the 5 cents for, and I take them to it's a recycling a bottle center, right? So you just pour them all out and they count them and then they pay you for it. That's better to do, because if you just put them in with the regular recycling, I think, see, there's another research question. If your family doesn't really care about getting that $1.20 back on every case of water, okay, but then let's see, which I am willing to bet that if you take it to a bottle recycling place, they get recycled for sure, right? If you just put them in the plastic, in the recyclable bin, it's a lot of that probably doesn't get recycled. So, but what you would need to do, if you want people in Staten Island to stop doing this, including your family, you've got to come up with some solutions, right? You can't just say, oh, let's stop. I think the more I'm looking into this, I think we should really stop buying plastic water bottles. And so you have to have solutions like, to tell you the truth, you can get really, really good water filters that you attach right to the plumbing, right? So that the water, that's coming out of the faucet has already been filtered by, like you can get these things that have like 7 different kinds of filter that take everything out, and the water is, when it comes out of the faucet, is just as good, if not better, than what's in the bottled water. And so that would be an investment. It would probably cost, maybe it's going to cost $150 for that filter. And then you have to sort of attach it under the sink yourself, or hire someone to do it for you. That's probably another $100 some if you hire a plumber to stop by and do it for you. And then you have to, replace the filters on a certain basis. So so anyway, but then you do a cost benefit analysis and you decide, well, okay, look at all the money we spend on bottled water. How long, when would be our break even? If we spent $200 on putting the state-of-the-art water filter under the sink so that we can start drinking water right out of the faucet, we can fill up our own bottles and reuse those bottles. At what point will we, you have to prove to people that at some point they're going to save money, right? Instead of buying all these plastic bottles. And then you're going to explain to them they should make this effort, because it's one of the easiest things you can do to increase the sustainability of their lifestyle. Right? Some families do eat hamburgers 3 times a week, and it's harder to get people to give up a habit like that. Yeah. So do you sort of know what I'm getting at here? Because the point is, Jocko, if you got to find out, because I think what you want to do is find out who's trying to convince, is there anybody on Staten Island right now? And I bet there is some, like, Staten Islanders, the Staten Island Alliance for Reduced Plastic Use, something like that. There's groups of people, what we call civil groups, people who band together and are trying to change something. And then they have two directions to go. They can go bring their message to the local politicians, and ask the government to please get the message out, which is sometimes tough because then they don't always have the money, right? But they should be getting the message out on the easy stuff, like on the government's Facebook page or on their website, to get this become a highly visible issue. Like when people go to the Staten Island website, they see a message about, click on here, reduce your plastic, here's how. And politicians normally don't do that sort of thing unless there's people who lobby for it, that want to. Could you at least put a 1 page on your website, so when people go to the website to find information about renewing their driver's license, or they go to the website to find out about that they find out about how, what are the rules on burning garbage, or all the sort of practical stuff, how, the website, find out about the schools, all that. But there should be a tab about living making Staten Island greener, and then people click on that. But the politicians don't do this unless people push them to do it. And there must be groups in Staten Island that are trying to make a difference. And it would be very interesting to see if you can find them. Because it's all about messaging, and it can seem hopeless. Like, people are, Americans in particular, but, all people, stick to what they know. It's very hard to get people to change, especially when they get older. People in your parents' generation, they're used to living one way. And if you're asking them to make some differences, like install a state-of-the-art water filter under the sink so you guys stop buying cases of plastic water bottles, you have to know how to get them to at least consider it and say, okay, well, we'll think about it. So that's how things really change, Darko, is more of, it's from the bottom up, right? That's what grassroots means. That's what grassroots means. So what questions do you have now about what we just talked about?
So when you also talk about groups, should I look at like the person that's representing my congressional district?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you just want to try to find I'm not talking about the politicians when I say groups.
Oh yeah, I know you're talking about like actual like groups instead of.
I'm just Googling right now.
Mhm.
Sustainability Staten Island. Okay. It looks like maybe there's a green. Green Staten Island. Hold on. No. See, there may not be a group, but I'm sure there is. Um, okay, now I'm looking just climate change groups. Ah, here's one. I just found one. Staten Island Environmental Communicators. Why don't you look at it too, so we can look at this together. It's siec.nyc.
Okay, I see it.
Did you find it?
Yeah.
So, on the home page, you've got the shoreline of Staten Island. That
Mhm.
looks like and that's probably by the bridge that goes to Brooklyn, maybe?
Yeah, I've been down there. It's by the Fort Wadsworth, I think it's called.
Is that what's on the left there, the fort? Is that the old fort?
Yeah.
Okay. So who are these people? What are they doing? Where do they get their money from?
Mhm.
Where do they get the money to have this website? And look at, they call themselves communicators. Because that's what you have to do to your parents and everybody else. You have to communicate and educate. Now, is this part of, let's see, home, contact us, gallery, blogs, who we are? Usually they should have something like who we are. And I put on contact us. You should join them right now. So the contact us, we are constantly on the street, in our parks, on our beaches, documenting the people and the places that make up Staten Island. Interesting.
Mhm.
Because once you've joined them, you have to, okay, I don't know, do you do Facebook? Because I know young people like you don't really do Facebook, or do you?
No.
You don't. So see, that's the problem, right?
Mhm.
There's a generational problem. Because your people, your generation is not using Facebook. And all these old people are using Facebook. So okay, but so they're taking, it looks like they're documenting things. But they do have events.
Mhm.
I clicked on gallery now, it shows events. Like the New Year's Day walk, January 2022. What else have they done? November 21. There you go. Look at that. In November 2021, they held a rally to have Governor Hochul sign MTA access bill. So I think what does that mean? I guess they wanted to build, they want, oh, I see. Well, I don't know if they want a new bridge connecting Staten Island, or they want the bridges to, I think it's about making the bridges more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. So people aren't always just driving their cars. I think what that might have been about.
I think I heard something about it. I think that has to do with something in Manhattan. I think because where they're holding the rally, I'm pretty sure that's by City Hall. And I think it has to do with one of the bridges down there.
Okay. But this Staten Island group participated.
Mhm.
All right. Well, then they have like a forage walk. And that's how you get people interested in this stuff. Do you organize a forage walk and you walk through, people do that up where I live in Hudson Valley all the time.
Mhm.
And you walk through the forest, the forest on Staten Island, and you find all this edible plants. things you can eat. And the idea there is the more that you find in the wild things to eat, the less stuff you're going to buy in the grocery store. No, and that means you're going to use, because one of the big problems about grocery stores is the packaging, right? Everything's all in this plastic and just all this packaging. You know, in Germany, where I used to live, every store, supermarkets, Best Buys, every store, the politicians, the laws were made that every store had to accept the packaging of things they sold. So if you bought something that had a big cardboard box and wrapped in plastic and whatever it is you bought, before you leave the store, after you go through the checkout and pay for it, there would be all these different bins to put the cardboard, put the plastic, put the whatever. And you would sit there and they'd have tables and where people like, after they just tear apart, they take all the packaging off of the thing they just bought and they leave it in the store. And then the store is responsible for getting all that stuff to a recycling center. That's an example of what politicians can do to get people to change their behavior, not go home, take all this packaging and just throw it in the garbage. Making the retailers responsible. There's just so many different ways that you can, anyway, it doesn't look like these people do that much. I mean, but let's see, they have a blog. Yeah, it's not necessarily about Staten Island. So, I mean, it's just about things, bicycling. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's too much sort of proactive. Ooh, look at their friends. Click on friends. Now we've got, there you go.
Oh,
Look at that.
Mhm.
Look at that.
This is
Gotham Whale. Friends of Blue Heron Park. Environment TV. Is that in with the Natural Resources Protect? That very first one looks like a group that might be doing more to get people to be aware of climate change, and getting people to, well, I don't know. Well, they're doing basic things. Look at all their events. Oh, they're it looks like they're mostly like picking up garbage, which is a good thing. You want people to get out there and pick up garbage. Yeah, look at beach cleanup. Beach cleanup. So
the beaches are really polluted.
I know Staten Island's famous for that. Everybody,
Yeah.
whenever you talk about the beaches of Staten Island, everybody sort of makes a funny face. Like no one would ever go swimming there.
Yeah, it's really, it's not clean. Every time I go there, it seems like it gets like dirtier each time.
Yeah. Oh, see, well, that's what they're trying to do. The National Resources Protective Association, protecting the marine environment since 1977. This might be a national group, but they have a chapter in Staten Island, right?
Mhm.
SINY. So there you go. There's a whole source of Great Kills community agriculture. So you're going to see that too. Or look at the Staten Island Coalition for Wetlands and Forests. These are all these private groups that I'm talking about
Mhm.
that can have an influence on getting people to live a more sustainable life. And these are the kind of groups that then go to the politicians and say, hey, there's too much plastic bottles on our beaches. You can't deny it. Here's one way we can help, and put out a messaging campaign, encouraging people to stop buying so many plastic bottles. Maybe, see, this is what a government can do if they have any money, is if it costs $200 to put a super duper filter under your sink so that you feel comfortable drinking the water out of the faucet, the government could give it every family who does that a rebate. They could give them, they could pay for half of it. They send them a check for 100 if they prove that they did it, or a quarter of it, $50. That's a good way to get people to change. But
would it, where would they get like the money for that?
right. Well, that's called a subsidy, right?
Mhm.
When the government is actually sending money to people to do something that the government wants them to do. That's what a subsidy is.
Mhm.
It's sort of an opposite of a tax. Because governments tax things, first of all, just because they need money to operate. But they tax things so to get people to stop doing things, right? That's why
Mhm.
they put a lot of tax on alcohol and cigarettes and things that the government doesn't want people to do. A subsidy is used to get people to do something they want them to do. And where the excuse me, where the money comes from is the best question, Charcoal. You asked the best question. So right now, President Biden got this legislation under the Inflation Reduction Act. There's $400 billion that is going to be distributed around the country to fight climate change, to do things to fight climate change. There's going to be money for erecting, putting in a bigger network of electric vehicle charging, because that's one of the things that keeps people from buying EVs.
Mhm.
Is that there's not enough places to go. You can't take a trip without figuring out where you're going to go, how you're going to charge it. There's money for subsidies. So for example, now if people want to put solar panels on their house, there's going to be money for those rebates. Like, maybe it costs you $20,000 to put the solar panels on your house, but with the government subsidy from this IRA, you might want to look under the climate change provisions. It's like $390 billion. It's huge. I mean, they're talking about, the US was always behind other countries when it came to climate change. And with this last bill under the Inflation Reduction Act, there's $400 billion to be used for different things to fight climate change. And that's huge. And it made us, like, as a country, like one of the countries who did the least amount on climate change, to now being like doing more than anybody else. So this is a really good news, right? That we finally got to, put a priority on this. But yeah, so the money, so that kind of money would have to go to New York State. Some of that money, that $400 billion will go to New York State to subsidize more solar panels on roofs. But it could also subsidize, and it is for making homes more sustainable. If you want to put in stop burning oil or gas to heat your home, there's money that you'll get to help buy a more efficient heat pump, which runs on electricity. Because, the whole thing about one of the big points of climate change, Jacko, is the first step is you got to try it to electrify everything. So people stop burning oil, burning gasoline, burning natural gas, burning propane gas, just burning all this carbon stuff. And you want to get people to start using electric. So like I have an electric lawnmower, right? I don't put gas in my lawnmower. I have a battery that I charge. It takes 3 hours to charge it. And then I can cut the lawn for like 45 minutes and then I have to charge it again. But, and the battery, and it's kind of expensive, but if the money would be there, well, if everybody would buy an electric lawnmower, a battery operated, instead of the ones where you pour gasoline into them or oil. Sometimes it's the 2-cycle engine, you have to pour oil and gasoline together into it. And if everybody started using that would make a real impact. I even have a battery operated chainsaw, because those are other things that families use, just all that stuff that they use that they would normally burn gasoline. Even leaf blowers, a stupid leaf. I never, because people are lazy not to rake their leaves. They're just blowing them around. But anyway, all that stuff can be encouraged if the government says, well, stop using your gas lawnmower and buy an electric lawnmower. A good electric lawnmower is going to cost $400. Well, the government will pay 100 of that, or maybe 150 of that, and that will get more people to change. So those are the kind of things the government can do, push this stuff along. And you're right. Where does the money come from? Well, a lot of it's going to come now from the Inflation Reduction Act. That's another direction of research you could do, is look into that, figure out of that $400 billion, what might be coming to Staten Island, right? To help Staten Island. That would be a little more complicated research. You could probably figure it out somehow. So anyway, we've talked about lots of different directions that you can take now. And I think you have to think about, Jacko, like what's your goal at this point? Do you want to write a little something about the elections coming up in 3 weeks, like figuring out what different politicians are arguing for when it comes to climate issues? That could be a very, very interesting sort of mini research project, which you can then incorporate into a bigger project later on. Do you want to look at, the funding, the $400 billion that are coming, that the federal government's now going to send out to the states to encourage people to change their lifestyle and, and build more public transportation and, making it easier for people to buy EVs. And I think even subsidizing that, like if you buy a new electric vehicle for $50,000, you'll get like a tax credit, like of $10,000. They might not send you a check for $10,000, but you can reduce your taxes by $10,000. So there's different ways to get people to start thinking in a new way, because that's what we have to do. I mean, you can only build so many barriers to protect the floodwaters from going over Staten Island. You can just keep, what you got to do is to get the people at Staten Island to change their thinking and change how they live. I think that's really the main lesson for you. And it's going to be your generation has to do it, because we've been screwing around with this for like 3 generations already, and not much has gotten done. And if anything's going to happen, it's really on your generation's shoulders now. You guys have to start living differently than your parents and your grandparents did. And that's really our only hope, you know, to keep Staten Island from getting flooded. That might be a good sort of part of an introduction for your project.
Mhm.
So am I making you hopeful or not hopeful about the future,
Not hopeful.
What is it?
Not hopeful.
Not hopeful, right? This is a big problem with, this is the ultimate problem with addressing climate change.
I
Is
feel
it
like
so, yeah, go on.
I feel like there's a lot that could be done, but everything seems really. I think everybody has like such a lifestyle that's really convenient, and if we start making like these big changes, people are gonna be really like resistant against them because
Yeah,
they seem really inconvenient.
and this is the problem. And that's why like your generation absolutely has to stop living like your parents and grandparents. I mean, there's just no if, ands, or buts. Your generation is going to make or break this thing. So, you know, when you guys become adults and you guys are buying cars and buying houses and deciding, you know, if you're going to buy bottled water and deciding, you know, are you going to, you know, put solar panels on your house, deciding what kind of, when you guys have got to make the right decisions. Otherwise, it's game over. You know, it's really, unfortunately, it's up to you guys, because the couple generations behind you have blown it because they were too comfortable to change their ways, or they just didn't even think about it or didn't know about it, right? Because a lot of people, they don't pay attention to that stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, that's why it's good that you're tackling this. And you know, maybe you're going to turn out to be a local leader. Maybe you're going to establish your own, when you're older, you'll start your own nonprofit group, like all these different ones. You know, the Staten Island Coalition for Wetlands and Forests. Maybe someday you're going to establish some organization that's trying to make things better, more sustainable in Staten Island or wherever you end up living. You know, you may not spend your whole life on Staten Island. And these kind of groups, where do they get their money from? They tend to get it from foundations, right? So foundations are basically like rich people who want to dedicate some of their money to doing good things. It's called philanthropy. And so, you know, they give, you know, like rich families, corporations, they'll put so many millions into a foundation, and then they'll tell the foundation, now will you please use this money to promote more sustainability, to educate more people about what they need to change in their lifestyle. You know, so money usually comes from philanthropists and gets distributed through foundations. And that's what most of these groups are getting money for. But then there's, I mean, there's TV, there's, you know, radio. See, so much is about communication, getting the word out, education. Wow, this Gotham whale, that looks really interesting. What's Gotham whale? tribe, because whales are starting to show up. Look at that. Wow. Do you see that picture?
Yeah. Are whales supposed to be in New York?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, before, when there were only Indians living in New York, in what is now New York City, I mean, it was full of whales and dolphins and all kinds of, it was one of the richest in aquatic environments on the face of the earth. You know, I always remember Henry Hudson, who is this Dutchman who was hired by the English to explore this. He's the one that discovered the Hudson River. He's the one, the first European to see, you know, what is now New York Harbor. And they had a really hard time sailing their ship up the Hudson River because it was so full of wildlife. It was full of whales and dolphins and turtles and beavers and otters and everything you can think of. And so they had to navigate really slow because it was so full of wildlife. Yeah, whales should be in New York Harbor, no doubt about it. And they're starting to come back. See, so that's why you can be hopeful, because if you really do things, if you can really, you know, you can make a difference. So, you know, there weren't any whales 15 years ago around New York City, and now the whales are coming back. And why are the whales coming back? Because the water is cleaner now than it was 15 years ago. You know, efforts have been made to make sure the water is cleaner. You know, they're just celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act from 1972. And in those 50 years, you know, the water pollution was just terrible in this country. Every place looked like the beaches of Staten Island. Everywhere you went, it was the beaches of Staten Island. Garbage and chemical pollution into the waters. You know, famously, there's this river that runs through Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You should look that up. That caught on fire. The river caught on fire and burned for months and months and months. They couldn't get the fire out. Why does it? How does a river? Because it was so full of chemicals and garbage, and you know, I mean, you know, that's what it was like in the 1970s. 50 years later, the water's so much cleaner everywhere. So progress can be made. There's no doubt about it. But you know, we need rules. We need the government to make rules. So one of the biggest rules, and you know, 50 years ago, cities would just take their waste, you know, from everybody's toilet. Everybody's toilet ended up in New York Harbor. You know, they weren't collecting this and processing it and cleaning it up. It just, every city just dumped their human waste into the water. Well, of course, you know, nothing can survive. That's going to kill off everything. And just in 1972, when they made that illegal, like they made cities, you cannot put, you know, directly, you know, wastewater into your river or your lake or your harbor. You've got to invest the money to process this. You have to treat this stuff. And now only after it's treated can you put the water back into the river or the harbor. And so, you know, rules have to be made, and the government has to do that. And private citizens can organize groups like Gotham Whale, you know, they're a private group of private citizens that, you know, they call themselves, see that when you scroll down, New York City's own whale research and advocacy. That's what you're looking for. Advocacy. People who are advocating that, you know, we keep making the water cleaner. We don't go backwards. We don't start polluting the waters more, you know, that whales will leave again. And they get money from members, donators, donations. People send them $25. Being a citizen scientist, that's another really interesting concept, Jocko. Do you know what a citizen scientist is?
No, and what exactly is a private citizen?
Well, that's all of us.
Oh,
It's people that are not working in the government. You have public, people are divided into public and private. But even people who work in the government are private citizens. Everybody's a private citizen.
mhm.
And the whole thing about becoming a citizen scientist, this is a new thing now too. I mean, last few years, a citizen scientist is where private citizens, just ordinary people like you and me, who are not, don't have doctorates in science, but we volunteer and help citizen scientists gather data to help the scientists analyze things. Citizen scientists are counting how many herons there are on Staten Island this year compared to last year, and they provide that data to the scientists. So that's another goal, is try to create more citizen scientists in Staten Island who are willing to contribute to volunteer and provide data and do some research for the scientists who are trying to come up with figuring out what the problem is and what the solutions could be. Anyway, I gotta go. I think, look at that beautiful dolphin. Oh, they're just such beautiful animals. Have you ever seen dolphins swimming in the ocean, Jocko?
No, I went whale watching before.
Where?
I think it was up by Maine.
Oh yeah, that's a good. And did you see any whales?
Yeah.
Pretty exciting, right? I mean,
Mhm.
these are magnificent animals.
It,
Have you ever-
it scared me because it came out of nowhere and it was so big.
Yeah, yeah, that can happen.
Mhm.
Yeah. But they're just, and that's a good experience because, people have to understand that there's other living things that we're sharing this planet with. And, we're human beings, do not need to be or should be the number one priority all the time. We have to understand that all these other forms of life need to be able to exist and thrive, and that's going to help us to exist and thrive. So yeah, and it's scary. You go out to watch whales and you see a whale jumping out of the water suddenly or just coming up, and it's huge and it's big. When I was 19 years old, I was a student in Costa Rica, and I was doing research, and I was paddling a little dugout canoe around this island in the Pacific Ocean. And suddenly a giant sea turtle came out of the water. And it was actually a little bit bigger than my canoe. So talk about scary, right? It's like, oh my goodness, what is this? Oh, it's a turtle and it's huge. But then, when you expose yourself to those experiences, first of all, you learn not to be so afraid. And then you learn, better your position in the world as a human being, how you fit into this. It's not just about you, it's about turtles, it's about whales and dolphins and so forth. And so, that's all part of it. And so many Americans especially are so cut off from wildlife, right? They they're just living in their houses and driving in their cars and shopping in the shopping malls, and they don't really get out and understand what wildlife and nature is all about and how important it is, right?
Mhm.
Anyway, I gotta go. I hope I gave you some ideas about what you might want to do or what direction you want to go in now.
Mhm.
And send me an email if you have any follow-up questions, okay?
All right, thank you. What do you think my next step should be?
Well, I think you need to think about that now. We just talked about some different next steps.
Yeah.
So why don't you, like we did with the title of your essay, your memoir, why don't you think about it? Send me an email with a couple of ideas and what next steps you want to go on. But it's all based on what you want, think about what you want to accomplish in the next month, in the next 2 months, think about it. Think about what is it that you want, and realistically, what can you do in the next month, in the next 2 months, or the next 3 months? You got to think about it, right? I don't want to always be telling you what to do. I mean, the whole point here is that you've got to sort of figure out how to do things on your own, and I'm just coaching, right?
Yeah.
So think about it, send me an email and say, well, I think maybe my next step should be this, or it should be that.
Okay.
And then I'll get back to you. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank
See
you.
you next Sunday.
See you
Bye.
next Sunday. Bye.